that in the node Slack as well?
Yep.
Awesome, and we should be live on YouTube now. Welcome again to another Open RFC call here at NPM. I am your host, Darcy Clark, the engineering manager for community and open source at NPM. Today's date is January 22nd, 2020. If you haven't already, feel free to add yourself to the meeting notes doc that I've shared a few times. And the agenda essentially that's posted, we try to post about a week before. Unfortunately, we've had some trouble at the beginning of the year here to get our agenda creation script to run. So apologize that this has been getting sort of created last minute. Again, some housekeeping here for folks that are on the call. This is live streamed, this is public, so just be mindful of any sensitive information. The point of these calls is to provide a means and mechanism for folks here at NPM to work closer with the community and to source ideas, features, and help to address bugs that the community brings up to us in this forum, and hopefully move things forward together as a community. I've done my best today to try to group a number of the issues together so we can quickly move through the agenda. There's a number of outstanding RFCs that we've got on the docket that essentially either need to be ratified or we need to provide some feedback if we don't think that they should be moved forward, and we don't plan to move forward with them. So we can kick things off actually with the RFC for multiple funding sources. We had talked about this 2 weeks ago. I know that Jordan Harvin, I'm not sure if he's on. Yep, he is. So I'm not sure if there's an update essentially around the work that's gone into this, but I was hoping that potentially, even if that work isn't completed, we can go ahead and potentially ratify this RFC.
Yeah, so Roy and I did some more work on it, made a lot of progress. There's some, I still have to work out some kinks, but yeah, I think I'd be content with the RFC merging for sure. And I'll try and finish that up maybe this week and get a PR into NPM.
Does anybody have any issues with the way that the RFC is currently, I guess, worded, or the implementation there? We're essentially going from like a one to many.
And just the particular decision that was referenced in the RFC, but that Roy and I worked out in more detail last week was in the JSON output is not going to change in a breaking way. First of all, if you suddenly start putting an array in your package JSON, the JSON will contain an array, which is fine. The human output, however, currently is keyed on package names, and then it shows the URL underneath it. However, with the ability to have many funding sources, it doesn't really make sense to model them that way. And so we've inverted it so that the human output is keyed on URL, and then it lists the packages underneath them. And the only open question I have to work out with that, which I can talk to Roy about, is because it shows like how to mesh the current packages funding information with with dependencies funding information when they're the same. But overall, the intention is still to have to just kind of invert that so that it's basically a list of URLs that are kind of with a nested list of package names for that URL underneath it.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that I would like to have in the RFC itself before merging it, is to have like a good example. Like it can be like what it will look like in a small dependency tree, but like also how it would look like with the big one with like a lot of duplication and like, so just to have the example there and have the people looking at it and be okay with it, and then we can improve in the later.
So given that, then maybe we should wait on merging it until like the next meeting, and in the meantime, I will update the RFC with the example, including that open question once it's resolved, and then we can revisit it then.
And just for your information, I guess there, Jordan, we are still doing biweekly 6x releases. So the next release that we have queued up is essentially a patch release for next Tuesday. So the soonest or the earliest that I think that we could probably get this in would be 2 weeks from Tuesday. If you do queue up that work and it is in a good place, we potentially could ship a minor release with this change.
Awesome.
If you folks can get some time to pair on that in the next few days, I guess.
Cool. Thanks. That's good to have a timeline.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. So we'll hold off on ratifying that first RFC until we actually know what that's going to look like. So moving on, there's verified account linking. I know Daniel is on this call and is actually taking notes right now. Would you mind maybe walking through this RFC and whether or not folks have had a chance to look at this? I think this is definitely something that we want to move forward with. So I'm not sure if we can potentially just ratify this as is, or if there's any feedback that we're looking for in terms of the implementation details or how this is currently worded.
Yeah, I can do that. So the problem that this is trying to solve is that today in your NPM profile, you can include your GitHub handle or your Twitter username as a way of kind of helping people understand who you are within the broader community. But the problem is that there's no verification behind this. You can put whatever handle you want and essentially masquerade as whoever you want to masquerade as. And so what this RFC does is it provides a little bit more verification around it. So you actually have to authenticate to GitHub or authenticate to Twitter as the person you're claiming to be before we'll let you perform that linking on your profile. And so that's kind of what this is intended to do.
I saw, Jordan, you had commented on this as well as I think Michael.
Yeah, I mean, in spirit, I think this is amazing, a way to both tell NPM, like prove to NPM which other accounts I am, but also a way to prove to other people that I'm in which NPM account I am. So like, it would be wonderful to end up in a world where I can both attach my GitHub account to and Twitter account, let's say, to my NPM account, and also go to my GitHub account and attach my NPM account to it. Because at the point where those two are linked, it opens up a very large range of possibilities to like, for freedom of information and security of so on and so forth, things that I could rant on for a long time.
Yeah, so sorry, go ahead. This actually sets the stage. This RFC doesn't cover, unless it's dramatically increased in scope since I saw it. This RFC does not cover things like logging into NPM with your GitHub account, logging into GitHub with your NPM account, like links between GitHub actions and like private NPM access or anything like that. But it is sort of the first building block towards anything in that whole kind of universe. And it has some discrete value in and of itself, and just, being able to say like, yeah, okay, it's cute that you said you're Linus Torvalds on GitHub, but like, are you really? Because I'm pretty sure doesn't really have a GitHub account and he's anti-GitHub. So yeah, it's I've seen a few people claim to be Isaacs on GitHub in their NPM accounts, and it's it's always been either me, test accounts, or spammers. Yeah, it'd be nice to just make that data much more valuable.
Well, and also like once you have this link, you could, for example, on an NPM package page, show like a special like icon, like a check mark or something, when the Git repo has a collaborator that is also an NPM owner. And
Right.
that way you can be sure that the Git repo referenced is owned by the same person who published the package. And then you can have a lot higher confidence that those two are the same. Whereas I've had packages of mine, someone has republished them under another name pointing back to my repo. And like that's not a good look if, you know.
Yeah, we could even, I mean, we could even prevent that from being done, right? And just say like, if you want to have a repo, I mean, this is looking much more broadly, but much further down the line. But if you want to have a repo in your package metadata, you have to be a verified GitHub account, and it has to be a GitHub. If it's a GitHub repo, you have to have a verified account, and it has to be the account. It has to be verified as somebody who's a maintainer on the project, yada, yada, yada. So if somebody did that, it would just, without them having to do anything, like in the package metadata on the website and in the registry, it would just not show that repository potentially.
Right. I mean, given that linking status can change over time, you'd probably not want to actually forbid it, but you might want a mode where you like, if you try to npm install, it'll just ignore any packages that aren't verified in this way. This is probably bike sheds we can talk about later.
Yeah. These are all great ideas for future RFCs, but I think this verified account linking, my only question is like how much, and I don't think that it's necessarily answerable in this call, but my only question is like how much backend work is going to need to be done to actually implement this. It's not like it's something the CLI can just sort of do on its own. We have to define endpoints and make sure they work and be an OAuth consumer, et cetera.
So given that, is there any reason why we can't potentially ratify this and then queue up those conversations for a later date?
I have to confess I've not looked at this since it was a Google Doc and an internal product plan. But if it hasn't changed significantly since that, I will give it my thumbs up later.
Okay, so maybe I'll just, we'll give you some time after this call to review that, and then we can potentially merge this in.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Cool, that will unlock a lot of stuff. So moving on, another RC that I know we had talked about on the last call, and I'm not sure if Will was able to make it, but I know Wes also has insight into this. And this might be the first time that you're seeing this, Isaac, is this RFC for signed documents. I'm not sure, maybe Wes, you can speak a little bit to the intent here by Will, and or we can, maybe if anybody has any thoughts on this. I think this is something that we want to do. Personally, from my standpoint, it's definitely something I would love to see us be doing. But yeah, maybe Wes, if you have any thoughts on this, you can queue it up.
I don't have a ton to add that wasn't discussed last time or in the issue. I would be interested to know if people feel like there is something blocking it, because I feel like all the sort of details are pretty solid.
Yeah, like I'm okay with us essentially ratifying this with the intent that, again, we're gonna have to set up our backlog some time to actually get this done. So that will fall in line with any other feature work that the registry teams have already in front of them. Yeah, Isaac, I'm not sure if you've gotten a chance to look at this now, since you weren't able to join a couple weeks back.
Yeah, I have looked at this. I have a couple of concerns, not so much, not concerns. I have a couple of things that I think ought to be addressed and kind of just finished before we ratify this and start treating it as a plan to move forward. What's presented in, so first of all, signing documents on the face of it, yes, absolutely, we should do that. The devil's in the details around a couple of these things, which I think are worthwhile and called out in the unresolved questions. The first is how do we handle cases where there are multiple registries or multiple different sort of registry proxies? Because we may have, in cases where you have like a single endpoint that proxies to the public registry as well as some internal registry or some other third-party registry. You may have multiple different keys for the same host name, right? So you have one package that's signed with the public registry key, another package signed with my internal private key, another package that's not signed at all, and it's just because it's from some, some other location. And there's no, I don't think it's an unsolvable problem. I just think it's a problem that ought to be solved. And it may affect how the implementation goes.
I agree, but I think that the intent would be that a proxy must re-sign everything, right?
That's a pretty good answer. I admit, and it just should be in the RFC.
Yeah, it definitely isn't in the RFC.
Right.
So yeah, I agree with that. Okay.
Would you mind giving that feedback just as a takeaway, Isaac?
Yes. The other one, and this is always, so they called out freshness guarantees, which I think is interesting. So an attacker could, fetch the package, hold on to it, wait until there's a vulnerability, and then keep serving the old one. Because if you get man in the middle, you man in the middle of the signature, and as long as I just prevent the package from changing, that signature stays valid, right? There are ways that there are methods of signing things that where the signature is only valid for some period of time and then has to be re-signed by the registry or the proxy. The details there have to certainly be spelled out because, we can spiral into complexity land pretty quickly. And maybe what we decide is it's just not worth it. Make sure your change date is up to date. The other open question that I have, which is not called out as an unresolved question in the RFC, is just sort of identifying how we go about checking that signature. There's doing it, there's a couple of options. Doing it out of band presents some challenges. Having Pacoche or Kakat, or it would probably actually be even NPM registry fetch, do that signature verification would be pretty challenging from a performance point of view. If the signature files are not, if the signatures are not sort of just bundled into the package themselves. And so I think all in all, this is a great idea, but we need to get it 2 or 3 more steps closer to implementation before we can call it ratified and have it actually be a proposal that we can go build. You know what I mean?
So I think it covers a little bit of where the signatures come from. So in this, I think it's proposing put them in a header that is returned with the package itself, which it doesn't, which part of it was the performance, not requesting the signature separately? Was that what you were worried about?
No,
actually doing the verification.
Actually doing the verification can
okay,
be really hazardous. If we just imagine you're doing a fresh install on CI and you're pulling in say 1,000 or a couple thousand dependencies. That's just a lot of PGP, right? That's that's a lot of calls out to GPG verify or whatever. So if we're doing that cleverly and we can kind of work out an algorithm for doing that that's not completely terrible, that's fine. Or if I'm sort of loath to make it opt-in because then we may as well not bother.
I'm not sure I agree on that.
It was so as one of the people who opt in, I'm sure that would be fine with you, but the vast majority, I'm just saying the overwhelming majority of NPM users are just going to do whatever the default is, right? Even we had integrity checking for a really long time before we actually just made it not opt in, and nobody actually did it. So it's sort of like, and we can look at also the history of Ruby gems and CPAN and other platforms that have had author signing. It's just, it ends up being like the 1% of people who are already very secure, keeping each other secure, and everybody else just doesn't sign their packages. So it's really got to be something that you get by default.
Well, so I could see that being the future. I don't think that should block what we have today. And I actually think that we could implement, move forward, get some people trying it out. Like, again, we would obviously.
Right.
And then that would give us the feedback we need. If it is a performance killer, then we have some time to fix that, or, you know, assess and decide what to do moving forward.
Right. No, we just have to have some path forward that gets it to be a on by default.
Yeah, I agreed with that completely. That should be the end goal. But I'm not sure that has much to do at this phase, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I certainly think it's very much better to sign pacuments than sign tarballs, right? They, although I don't know, even this, there's some pros and cons, right? Because a tarball, once you verify the signature for a given tarball, you know it's valid forever. Because the tarball never changes, but the pacument does when new versions get published. However,
right, but I think that's the problem, right? We're trusting the SHA returned from the pacument to be the thing that verifies that the tarball is the thing we thought it would be. So, like, if you don't trust the pacument, you don't trust the tarball anyway. So
right.
I mean,
we do have a npm registry signature of the tarball integrity. What we don't have is any way to check it baked into the CLI. Yeah, so the signatures are there. I mean, if you look at it, you know, if you run like Pacoche manifest on something, you'll see that it has, you know, what does it say? NPM signature, and that's just signed with exactly this key, this npm registry keybase PGP key. But without any tooling to automatically check that, it gets kind of pointless. And prior experimentation that happened, you know, a couple of years ago when we started doing this, basically found like, yeah, your performance goes to absolute garbage if you have to check the signature for all of the tarballs that you're downloading. I don't know, maybe another angle to take on this is like, rather than worry about signed pacuments, let's figure out a reasonable way to start checking the signatures on the tarballs themselves.
So I think one of the things this tackles that doesn't is I'm just getting the pacument and I want to make sure that it's accurate portion, right? So I think that there are two separate things. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of tooling that's all it really needs to do. And if it had this guarantee, that would be nice. You know, even if the CLI, you know, if npm install, let's say, did do the tarball version, not the pacument version, still maybe that's fine, as long as the tooling we'd want to build around just the pacument stuff still had some, you know, some guarantees there.
Yeah, I think the way that I would go about implementing this is, you know, assuming we can work out some way to, in a node program, given a signature and a message, you know, whether that's like a short integrity body or a hash of the pacument or whatever, verify that the signature matches the thing. Then make Pacoche and npm registry fetch and everything else just like they do with integrity values, right? If you provide an integrity value of any given request, it will verify that the request matches that integrity. If you then also provide a signature, it'll verify that the integrity matches that signature or the hash matches that signature. And then any tooling that's using our tooling would automatically benefit from that, including the CLI and Pacoche and npm registry fetch.
So it sounds like, Isaac, there's some feedback you want to give on this RFC specifically before we ratify it. Just to move things along here. And I apologize if my audio is breaking up. Okay, so I think takeaway is let's mull on this a little bit more. I appreciate though, like all the work that Will did to initially propose this and like bring this to us, because I think there is something here that we definitely want to do. And I see the use case for like the proxy and or mirror registry sort of use case. Yeah. So if you can, Isaac, maybe whenever you get some time over the next couple of weeks before the next call, just give some of that feedback, and maybe we can break this out into like another RFC potentially, like for something that we can move forward with potentially.
Right. Or just identify some technical steps that need to be taken.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Will do.
Cool. Moving on then. Number
90.
Would you like to speak to this, Isaac? I know that you brought this up the other day.
Yeah, I did, and this came about as I was going through and making Arborist able to build the or reify a package tree. If you have an optional dependency with a build script and that build script fails, it needs to know, oh, okay, this, Chocodar doesn't install on Linux. So I need to remove that, as well as anything that was, if it's an optional dependency, remove it and remove all of its dependencies if they're not dependent upon by anything else. Long story short, Arborist needs to be running lifecycle scripts. The way that we currently create the environment for lifecycle scripts is a little bit ridiculous. We take the entire npm config, convert all of it into environment variables, put them in the environment, including some stuff that should really just be, that's just sort of an artifact of how we generate that config file, like the argv object, which some folks have come to rely upon, of course, because that's what happens. Whatever is exposed is public API. Then what it also does is takes everything in the package and converts that to environment variables as well. This leads to some really absurd cases, like if you have a really long authors list in your package JSON, the npm CLI scripts themselves have stuff in the environment like npm underscore package underscore authors underscore 275 equals some person's name. So there's no need for like the overwhelming majority of that stuff. The package JSON in particular, like it's in JSON, you can read it, and most programs that depend on this stuff actually do. There are, since I proposed this, there are a handful of cases that folks have brought up that I think are pretty valuable and worth addressing. But my first sort of push at this was like, what if we just didn't do that? What would happen there? And or what if we just provided a much more minimal set of things like the path to the package JSON for the package whose lifecycle scripts are actually being run. And then if you want to open it up and look at it, like you can do that real easily. There's a million ways to read JSON in JavaScript. For config options, though, this did bring up a handful of cases, and there are two actually that were kind of interesting. One use case of argv was in the is pre-publish or is publish module that Rebecca Turner wrote 5 years ago.
Publish, yeah.
In publish, right. Two things about that. One is we have pre-publish only as a lifecycle script now since npm 4 or 5, I think. And so if you really want something that only runs in the actual pre-publish, like there is actually a more straightforward way to do that. But even if you didn't, I think that it makes sense to just have a definitive npm command environment variable that is the thing being run. The other issues that were brought up, I think, can be addressed by just taking everything that is not a default config value and putting that in the environment. And this actually, the use case that this that this addresses, we have a lot of this in the CLI project ourselves. Let's say I have a post version or a pre-version script that runs npm test, and then a post version script that runs npm publish. And npm publish needs an OTP file. It needs an OTP config in order to publish for my two-factor auth. So what I often do is I run npm version -- OTP equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If that config value is not being placed in the environment, then when the subscript gets run, it's not going to have the same arguments in its CLI, and so it's not going to have that that config value. This is also brought up as an issue for what is it? Install pre-build or pre-built install. Pre-build install uses some of these, some of the values to try and figure out, am I being installed as part of a normal registry install, or is this a local install of all my deps with no arguments, or is this installing a Git dependency? So we can address that by placing the from, resolved, and integrity values in the environment, which is actually kind of nice anyway. And then also everything else that they need can be gotten from the from putting all of the non-default config values into the environment. So that's basically that. The other thing about this that'll make it a lot simpler and just kind of remove a huge source of friction and bugs in management and development of npm is the just copying the environment from the parent environment, which we right now do painstakingly manually in npm lifecycle, unless like that is the default behavior of processes, is to inherit their environment. Like there's no need to require that you have to provide all of that for all the.
Is that even true on Windows or with like certain shell options or things like that?
So if you provide an environment variable to Node's child process, then you do need to provide the whole environment. It only copies it if you don't, but it's just something that you should be able to set the environment and then call this function that runs a child process, and it'll just inherit it, right? Like
right. What I
having
mean
to
is
build
like,
it up before you pass it to npm lifecycle.
Right. That all makes sense. I just you were saying it's the default behavior. Like I think the default like bash behavior I'm used to is that a child process automatically inherits the environment from the parent. But I'm wondering if like, are there any wacky ZSH options that could disable that, or is that true in PowerShell or Git Bash? Like,
it doesn't actually matter, because in practice we are still going to be copying it to pass it to Node in order to set additional things. But there's we're building up this environment based on the config values every single time by looking at the config every single time, even though that is never going to change between two lifecycle scripts, right? So there's a pretty costly operation being run thousands of times in a normal install. And it's being run even in cases, I believe it's in some cases even being run when we end up not calling any kind of child process, right? Because it doesn't actually have an install process. So an install script. So anyway, npm lifecycle is a trash fire, as I have been calling it in our Slack over the last 2 days. And I take full responsibility for setting that particular bit of, for creating that trash and then setting it on fire years ago. And so I'm rewriting it now. The other thing that is interesting, and I just came across today as I was writing tests for this, is hook scripts. So we have this thing where if you have a node module / I believe .hooks, you can create an install script that gets run for all installs. I'm not sure what to do about this, because the way that the way it's being handled right now in npm lifecycle is super weird. I might just make a way for run script to like take a arbitrary command as an argument. Otherwise, yeah, this hook script thing is. I'm sure there's like dozens of people using it that will be very upset if npm 7 doesn't support it. But I'm not sure how we go about supporting it like long term. We may have to deprecate or do something.
I mean, there's a bit of a weirdness around install being the verb used for two completely different kinds of actions. One is npm install, like give me all the deps for my current project, and the other is like, you know, effectively like yarn add or remove, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like where I'm saying like do something with this specific dep. And as it relates to run scripts, like I've often wanted a way to say, like run npm test, but don't run the pre-test or post-test scripts, and run npm install, but don't run the pre-install or post-install scripts in my local package JSON, but run them in all the dependencies, or vice versa, where I want to run my top level ones, but I don't want to run the transitive ones. And so I'm wondering, I mean, that sounds like a lot of churn, so, but like, I'm wondering if clarifying the two kind of use cases of install my current package's deps versus install, like when installing a specific dep, like those are kind of two different things. Does that make sense, what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it does. From the point of view of building the tree,
there's not a difference, is there?
There
right? Whether
is,
you're installing all of them or the root node.
well, so there is a difference from the point of view of building the tree, because in one case we make some modifications to the ideal tree before reifying it, we make some modifications to the virtual tree before building the ideal tree and then reifying it. If you just run npm install, we just take, if we have a virtual tree, we just basically take whatever's in the package lock or the shrink wrap and lay that out on disk.
Yeah, but if you didn't have that, right? Like the processes are the same. You're just talking about a step that would be slightly different, right? Like the idea of, I'm speaking to the idea of like breaking up install like root or install a single package, like which is a node of the tree, right? Like install root is a node of the tree, just happens to be the root node, right? Like those two actions are the same.
They're pretty similar. I mean, they appear different from a user intent point of view. Like that's kind of what Jordan's getting at here, it sounds like. Because in one case I'm saying I would like to start using this new dependency, and in the other I'm saying I would like to start working on my project. And so the flag, the way that we sort of filter on that, although in the second case, in the case where you add a dependency, we also install the rest of the tree. Like,
yeah, but also in terms of like the hooks that you're running, right? Like in one case, if I want to, you know, start working on my project, so npm install with the root node, I'm going to run all the like hook scripts or what have you for all the things that have one. And then if I'm installing a particular one, I'm still going to need to run all the, you know, if there's a post install script, I'm still going to need to run that particular hook, right? So like the hooks would still run in both situations. Like
yeah, whenever we reify a node, we run its scripts. So
speaking to Jordan's case of like, sometimes we want to install the, like sometimes we want the hooks to run and sometimes we don't want them to run depending on contextually, what have you. So
like in the top level package JSON, I'll often put things in post install that are like things that I want other developers in the company, like I want their install to fail if they're not true, right? So like npm install currently doesn't check like npm ls, for example. And so I might add to post install an npm ls check and a custom error message saying something's wrong, like don't continue. Because I want to make sure that both in CI and locally, like they're stopped when things are wrong. I like at Airbnb, we had a post install script that like after on post install created a bunch of symlinks in the Rails like vendor folders for legacy stuff. And I'd want to be able to use ignore scripts for transitive dependencies in some way, and still always run those top level post installs. And to me, those are conceptually different. One is post install of the app, and those smaller ones are post install of a package.
Yeah, this is similar to the kind of like prepare, pre-publish semantic subtlety. If you have a post install script, like if I'm working in tap, right, I might want to have a post install script that verifies that, like, I don't know, something is set up properly in order to develop on this project.
Yes.
But when you install tap, I don't want that to be run.
Yeah. So if we had like a install -app script or something, post install dash app or something, that that would be kind of like the prepare, where I would add that for the things that were only for my app level and not related to, you know, I don't know, something like that. I see what you're
That
saying.
makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
I love where this is going. I also think we're pretty far afield now from RFC 90, and actually 73 is somewhat related. So I kind of want to move on to that if everybody's okay with it. But like separating out, you know, a new lifecycle hook just for installing in the root project totally makes sense.
Yeah. So just to move this on, did you? There are two items here that I do want to make sure we get to. So specifically the one that was added last year by Daniel, which is RFC number 92. I would love to get to with the last 15 minutes that we have. And Isaac, you would like to speak to also 73.
73 is a great idea. I think we should ratify it. It's super easy to do. It's a breaking change, and it's going to be necessary for supporting workspaces and a couple and just even link dependencies. We absolutely should do this, and I'm including it in the rewrite of npm lifecycle.
Okay, so we can just move forward with that essentially.
Yeah, and there was another one as well. Real quick, number 77 as well. This implements, which is, or makes it possible to implement an npm v7, which is npm install output scares people. I don't want to be scary. I want npm to work, and like if an optional dep fails, but this install continues, like it should be fine. So the rewrite of the lifecycle script runner will have a way to control whether or not something gets dumped to the output, and then the client can decide whether it needs to be quiet or loud.
I know I removed actually the RFC 77, that PR from the agenda, just because we had previously discussed that it seems like that itself can probably get closed out. It doesn't necessarily need to be moved forward in any, there was no real tangible, this should have been probably more of a issue or a thread and a comment. So I guess just as an action item or takeaway, let's potentially close that out with a comment to what you're saying.
Yeah, I mentioned it. Oh, awesome. No, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, there was some discussion a couple of weeks ago on it.
Yep. Yeah, so we can probably close that out. I know Wes pretty well, and I can speak to that and just close that out. So if there isn't anything else on those, I would like to skip ahead to that RC 92 because we have Daniel on the call as well. I actually saw that Ben Code jumped on quickly, but I think had to run, and I've tried to ping him. Just for everybody's context and so everybody's aware, Ben has recently launched a tool that they use over at Google called the Wombat Dressing Room. It's in some sense analogous or lines up with I think this RFC that Daniel's put together for what we would like to see in terms of a future offering from NPM. And I know Wes and Jordan have also been a part of discussions with the package maintenance working group for essentially, further bolstering the offering that we have for automated builds and publishes in CI and how we can, make those more secure. I think this is essentially the first pass at outlining what we can offer here in terms of staged package publishes. Daniel, would you want to quickly maybe go over the RFC and give us some insight into the thinking here?
Yeah, I can do this. So, like as you said, Darcy, the basic problem that we're trying to solve is we have this situation now where when you're publishing a package, it just goes live, right? Like there's no intermediate way to put packages before you have a human signing off on them, which in turn causes additional friction when you have CI involved and you want CI publishing stuff as well. So basically what this does is it provides a staging area. And so you can choose to publish a package to a staging area, in which case it's not live and free for others to download. Or you can publish it to production. And you can also move a package from staging to production. And so what this does is it enables two kind of separate use cases. The first use case is it lets you have your CI system published to staging with abandon. It doesn't have to wait for a human to say, yeah, this is good, I'm ready for the world to see this. And it also addresses a security risk, which is that using 2FA doesn't really work with CI today. And so instead you can say, I don't need 2FA enabled to publish to staging, but I do need 2FA enabled to publish to production. So it kind of adds a gate that you can use to give humans that last say and keep them in the loop before something actually goes live, while not inhibiting your CI system from doing its thing. So the four things that the RFC kind of outlines to make this possible are first to have that staging area on the registry, and then to open access to that staging area by adding a CLI flag, which lets NPM commands act upon the staging area as opposed to production. And then also providing a new CLI command, which would let users promote a staged package to production. And so to facilitate that transition. And then the fourth bit was to have an auth token that can be scoped to the staging area specifically. So what this lets you do is it lets you say that my CI system can publish to staging, but it can't publish to production because the auth token that I've given it only has permissions on staging. And so we think that these four improvements would provide us with a kind of an MVP to staging on the registry. That's not a huge lift, but that opens the door to additional improvements in this area.
Yeah, I appreciate all the work you did to sort of outline this, as we've had a number of conversations internally and externally with Wes, Jordan, and Isaac. We've commented on a number of threads out there. Again, this is obviously gated or blocked by any other feature work that our team would have in front of us, or the registry teams would have in front of us as well. But we want to get this out so that we can have a discussion here in the open about whether or not we see value or the community sees value in this. So, Isaac, I'm not sure if you have any comments on this.
No, seems good.
Cool. Wes, Jordan, I know
And
this is the
I
first
see a lot of
yeah.
value. So definitely, I think this will unlock a bunch of workflow opportunities that we've been looking for, to help build more concrete CI integrations. So this is going to be very helpful for that. One thing I want to say about that, and this is going to affect probably a lot of the people who are, customers of other registry providers. There are a few solutions that they have that are different from this. I think there will be some effort probably to get them on board, which I did have a conversation. We had a conversation in one of the package maintenance working groups about writing some compliance test suites. I think this would be a great thing to start if we wanted to do that. This feature would be a great one since, I think it will affect a lot of people. So if there was some open, as you're building this, it'd be great if there was some work on having an open test suite that other registry providers could run against themselves to make sure they're complying with this new feature. Obviously, that has nothing to do with the RFC process. I just wanted to say that piece.
That's a really good point. Definitely something that we should put on our radar in terms of even a way to have some sort of documented chart of the various registries and their implementation of something, these types of features, so that the drift doesn't get too crazy, right?
Yeah, that would help. To be honest, I told this to the Artifactory folks when they were here a couple weeks ago. I said, look, if you don't implement it exactly as the public NPM registry, we're not going to use it. So you need to be more in sync. I actually told them they should be coming to these meetings. We'll see. I sent
Yeah.
them links. But I basically
Love to
said
have
like,
them. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it'd be helpful just to have other people at the table. I think same thing goes for GitHub package registry. I mentioned it to them as well in our, I had a meeting with them as well. And again, same thing. It's like, I think they should be coming to these. So they're not, we'll see. Maybe we can work better on that in the future. But I think it will be very important to get their feedback and make sure that they're mostly just to make sure they're aware of what is happening so that, you know, when all these people who are using alternate providers get to that point, we don't have, you know, a huge contention point.
Sounds good. So based on the fact that we only have about 5 minutes left, I want to be mindful here. There was only a few, two issues that we essentially, or three actually, sorry, that we've sort of skipped over here. But I don't think we're going to have enough time to really get into them. I'm wondering, actually, I do want to get to number 75. So feature prompt, a prompt for module type as part of npm init. I want to speak to this quickly because I've reached out to Wes recently, letting him know, and I'll let other folks know here that I've contacted the owner of the create-pkg package, who essentially looks to be just squatting on that name for the last few years. And we can consider that package if we do essentially transfer ownership, if there's no dispute, and are able to, you know, transfer ownership to, I believe, package maintenance working group or the package JS org. I believe this would be a great use case for modifying and sort of evolving what npm init does. So if folks don't know, any package that is prefixed with create dash is essentially looked at as a template. So you can run npm init pkg in this case, and you could get an experience that can evolve from the bare bones npm init experience. So this might be a way and an opportunity for us or the package maintenance working group to provide new sort of features or flagged scaffolding in what would look like a almost native experience.
Yeah, so Darcy and I chatted about this sort of in a Slack thread, and I'll repeat a little bit what I said there. So I've worked towards some of this, totally independently, not really informing people, just kind of working on my own because it's something that I do run npm init a lot, and I wanted a little bit more out of it. So I wrote one that is create-package-json, which is a horrible thing to type. npm init pkg is much better. That said, I think we should, with the package maintenance working group, discuss, because I think there's like the bare bones stuff, which is just like we talked about, the knitting of the package JSON. But I think there's a lot more opinions that we, as the package maintenance working group, could add that might be beyond just what's in the package JSON. So I think that looking at where that package would live in the breadth of things we could provide, I think is probably important. Because I personally see it, you know, having other files, licenses, and contributor code of conducts and stuff like that, that we as a, you know, the node community sort of get our backing behind, and that it goes beyond just npm init's current scope. So I think maybe there's a body of tools that we could build. I actually brought this up to Darcy, and I don't know how you all feel about this. Maybe this is worthy of an RFC, but move the npm init functionality itself out into a create package and just have a default npm init where it actually does npm init create, you know, it runs create dash init, or, you know, we could come up with whatever naming there we'd want, but that would move it into user land, which would help it maybe evolve a little bit faster or more easily. I don't know how that you know,
That
sounds
that
fun.
functionality exists already, and not in terms of the create thing, but the like literally the npm init or npm package init module or repo on GitHub is what the npm init thing runs under the covers.
Oh yeah, I actually knew that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I
It's
guess
like
I didn't see it as in user land, but yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying there.
Yeah,
that
because
maybe
it's
that would
not
be-
technically. You're right. Yeah, like it would be nice if that was more of a very user land thing rather than under the umbrella of npm, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, it could go either way. I could see it doing, you know, still being internal and being just bare bones. But if we provide something that does so much more and we want to push people to it, like then what's the point of having the basic thing, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Just to be mindful of time here, we're pretty much coming up to on the hour. I appreciate everybody jumping on today, though. And if there's any other discussion that can happen async, let us know. Love the feedback that we're getting and appreciate everybody that is joining these calls. Definitely, it's super helpful and useful for us. And I'm sure we'll continue to have conversations in the various other open source working groups that we have. Definitely feel free to circle back on each one of these threads if there's any other feedback or collaboration you want to make happen. But yeah, I think that's essentially all we can get to today. And again, just want to say that I appreciate everybody jumping on. And yeah, we'll see you in a couple weeks. Cool.
Cheers, everybody.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Yeah.